Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you're tuning in, you're here because you want more than just the headlines. You want the deep connections, the surprising insights, basically the shortcut to really understanding complex stuff. We unpack source material piece by piece just for you.
And just before we jump in, a quick but important point. This deep dive is being shared completely free of charge across all major platforms, purely for educational purposes.
All right, so today we're getting into something pretty fundamental if you're interested in consciousness studies, metaphysics, the deep stuff.
We really are. We're diving into session 21 of the Early Sessions Book 1 of Seth material. And this one, it was recorded, Monday, February 3rd, 1964. It's just this amazing blend of personal history, family drama, and some pretty big cosmic ideas.
Yeah, and our mission today, for you listening, is to try and get some real clarity on how these past life relationships specifically, all the messy stuff, the family dynamics, even financial debts, how they actually shape our psychology right now in this life.
It's fascinating stuff. We're talking cosmic reparations, these psychological filters we all have, and thankfully a good dose of humor mixed in too.
Which keeps it from getting too heavy, right?
Exactly. And the humor, it actually kicks off right at the start of the session. The setting itself is just perfectly domestic. Jane Roberts, the channel, and her husband Joseph are there, getting ready. Joseph had just sketched out this vision he'd had.
Oh, yeah, the vision of his younger brother Dick's deathbed scene from a past life in, 17th century England?
That's the one, 1671. But before Seth can even start talking through Jane, their cat, Willie, decides to make an entrance.
Doesn't he always? What did Willie do this time?
Well, apparently the sketchboard looked like a great thing to jump on, knocked it right over, then vaulted onto a bookcase. Classic cat chaos during a serious moment.
Perfect. So you've got this potential link to the cosmos about to open up, and the cat's just causing trouble.
Pretty much. And when Seth does start speaking through Jane, his very first words just nail that vibe we're talking about. Relaxed, a bit chilling, but definitely funny. He says, "Good evening, sports. Never mind, cats will be cats." The drawing is very good.
I love that. It's like, okay, cosmic entity acknowledges feline interference, approves art. It just makes the whole thing feel so much more grounded, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're about to talk about, some pretty grim 17th century realities.
Yeah, it sets the stage perfectly.
Okay, so let's dig into that 1671 scene.
Yeah.
Seth immediately zones in on Joseph's sketch, right? One of his brother Dick dying.
Right away. And Joseph thought he had a pretty good picture, but Seth starts refining it, adding details. It paints this picture of a life that was just incredibly crowded and struggling.
The first thing was the room itself, wasn't it? Seth said it was much smaller than Joseph had drawn.
Much smaller. And this is the detail that really hits home the density. Joseph focused on Dick being ill naturally, but Seth points out there were actually 3 beds squeezed into that single upstairs front room.
3 beds? Wow. Okay, so who was in them?
Well, Dick was in the main bed, the biggest one, which usually belonged to the parents, Throckmorton and Lissy. They gave it up for the sick boy.
That says a lot right there.
It does. Then the eldest sister had her own bed in the same room, and the youngest brother, who was only 3, he was in the 3rd bed.
So that's 4 people already.
Plus the maid. There was a smaller, separate bed for her, too, in that same room.
5 people sleeping in one room. It just screams financial hardship, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And Seth layers in these little details that make it so vivid, like the mattress on that main bed, just straw. But the bed frame itself was an heirloom, their best piece of furniture.
So even in poverty, some things held value.
Right. And the coverlet on Dick's bed, that was another heirloom, this one from Leslie's family. You get this sense of them pouring everything they valued, emotionally and materially, into this sick child, despite having so little.
It really humanizes them beyond just, names from the past. What about the rest of the house? Was it just as cramped?
Oh, yeah. Seth describes this rickety staircase going down to the shop area. And behind the shop, there was a kitchen/parlor, basically one space doing double duty, barely separate from the work area.
Not much privacy then.
Not at all. And there was a storeroom, too, with just an earthen floor. And off that storeroom, a little shed where they apparently housed an imbecilic errand boy.
Good grief.
Yeah.
Every square inch accounted for. It really paints a picture of just how marginal their existence was.
Totally. And then there's a little mystery about the shop itself. Seth says he can't immediately tell them what Throckmorton actually sold.
But he confirmed the sign, right? The one Joseph saw in his mind.
Exactly. Confirmed the sign outside was a wooden spoon. It's such a specific, mundane detail, but it just anchors the whole thing. This big spiritual drama, this past life connection. It's all happening above a little shop with a wooden spoon sign.
Those details make all the difference. But okay, let's talk about the other people crammed into this life. The maid, Patricia, you mentioned her. Her story's pretty tragic too, isn't it?
It really is. Patricia was related. She was Throckmorton's half-sister's daughter, basically working for room and board, trying desperately to scrape together some kind of dowry to get out of there.
And Seth is quite blunt about her prospects, isn't he?
Yeah, he notes she was no beauty and implies Throckmorton, always short on cash, probably never paid her much beyond keeping her fed and housed.
And her life didn't get any easier.
No. She died just 2 years after Dick, the boy in the main bed, diphtheria. She was only 17.
17, that's heartbreaking.
And here's where it gets really, chilling, like you said. Seth connects her directly to the present. He reveals Patricia is actually the niece of the present-day mother in Joseph and Jane's circle.
Okay, so there's the connection. But does that past life death have an echo now?
A significant one, according to Seth. Because she died so young, right as she was entering womanhood, before her body fully established its adult cycles, she apparently has difficulty adjusting to womanhood in this life. Seth even states she's unable to bear children.
Wow. So a death at 17 in 1673 directly impacts fertility, or at least the psychological adjustment to womanhood, centuries later.
That's the implication. It's like the unresolved energy, the abrupt end at that specific developmental stage, created a kind of blueprint or block that carried over. The timing of the death mattered deeply.
That's a profound idea. And we also have to remember the background grief here, right? Leslie and Throckmorton had lost other children.
A lot of them. Seth says Leslie had already lost 4 children before this current group we're discussing, including one son, Delton, who actually lived to 18.
Delton, he was the one Throckmorton was counting on.
Yes. He was meant to take over the shop. His death from pneumonia, apparently very sudden, just 3 days of illness, absolutely devastated Throckmorton. That specific loss, that bitterness, seems to be a really key piece of the puzzle here. It sets up a lot of the later dynamics.
So much loss. But there was one survivor from that crowded room, the youngest boy.
Right, the little 3-year-old in the third bed. He actually made it through all that. Lived to a ripe old age, became a prosperous tradesman himself, dealing in wools and textiles.
Do Jane and Joseph know him now?
Seth specifically says they don't know him in this life, which is also interesting, right? It shows that you don't necessarily reconnect with everyone from a past life group. Some threads just aren't picked up again in the immediate circle. People move on, follow their own paths.
Right. Not every acquaintance is a major karmic entanglement.
Okay, so now let's connect the dots. We've got this backdrop of grief, poverty, crowding, and that deep bitterness from Throckmorton. Seth identifies the core issue in 1671.
Which was his resentment towards his eldest daughter.
Exactly. Resenting her fiercely for not being a boy, especially after losing Delton, the heir apparent, and then with Dick being so ill, his hopes were pinned on sons.
And this resentment played out in a very practical, almost cold way, didn't it, with her leaving?
Yeah, it sounds quite transactional. She was 23, still unmarried, which Seth describes as a strain on the family income. So Throckmorton basically paid her off, gave her some cash, some goods.
Like a settlement.
Pretty much. Enough for her to go live with relatives outside Paris in France and try to save up her own dowry there. It wasn't sending her off with love. It was more like removing a financial burden, an exile dressed up as an opportunity.
Okay, so that's the past dynamic. How does that setup manifest now? This is the big reveal, isn't it?
This is the core of it, Seth states very clearly. Throckmorton is now the present father in the lives of Joseph and Jane's connections, and the eldest daughter is his present wife.
Wow. Okay, let that sink in. The resentful father and the resented daughter from 1671 chose to come back as husband and wife.
Deliberately. It's presented as an orchestrated setup for working things out.
Now, we need to be careful with this term reparation or debt that Seth uses, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean punishment like we think of it.
That's absolutely crucial. Seth is very specific. He uses debt not to imply guilt or sin or some cosmic judge handing down a sentence. It's more like an unresolved energy, a challenge that the personalities involved choose to face again.
For growth, for understanding.
Exactly. Throckmorton chose this lifetime, this relationship structure, specifically to do reparation to the soul he was so bitter towards, to face the challenge of loving and accepting her this time around.
But the challenge isn't one-sided, is it? The daughter, now the wife, she carried her own feelings from that past life, too.
Absolutely. Her resentment was just as potent, even if operating subconsciously now. Seth points out that back in 1671, she wasn't just a passive victim. She sensed her father's bitterness about her gender, and she fought back. She was apparently extremely cruel, particularly in speech.
So they were locked in this really toxic feedback loop.
A deeply ingrained pattern of mutual resentment and verbal attack. And that pattern, that energy, is what they both chose to confront by becoming husband and wife in this life.
Okay, and this leads to one of the most, frankly, bizarre psychological dynamics Seth describes in this session. The wife's subconscious motivation for having children in this life.
Right, it's mind-bending. Seth reveals that the wife, the former eldest daughter, bore her husband 3 sons in this current lifetime.
3 sons. Exactly what Throckmorton craved in the past.
Precisely. And Seth says this wasn't just chance. Subconsciously, it was intended as a kind of gift or sacrifice, an offering to finally heal that ancient bitterness stemming from her deep-seated feeling of having failed him by not being a son back in 1671.
She's subconsciously trying to fix the 17th century problem by delivering the right children now.
Think about the weight of that. She's trying to fulfill a centuries-old perceived obligation, believing that this will finally balance the scales, earn his love, fix everything. It's all happening beneath the surface of their conscious awareness.
But it didn't work out like that, did it? The gift wasn't received or didn't magically fix things.
No. And this is where the attempt at reparation goes sideways and creates a new problem. When the father, formerly Throckmorton, didn't, suddenly transform or fully accept this gift of 3 sons as the ultimate cure, the wife turned against him again.
How?
Seth says she started making too much of the sons to pay him back.
Using the children against him.
Essentially, yes, turning them into emotional leverage. It stops being about healing the past and becomes about wielding power in the present, a new form of attack using the very gift she offered.
That's just devastating for everyone involved, especially the sons, presumably.
Seth implies it creates a whole new layer of toxic dynamics, impacting the son's own emotional stability. So the attempt to resolve the old debt actually spun off into a new challenge for the entire family. It's a cautionary tale about how these subconscious reparations can get tangled.
Absolutely chilling. And we can't forget Patricia, the maid from 1671. She's back too, as the mother's niece now.
Yeah.
Was she involved in the original toxicity?
Oh, she wasn't just a passive observer. Seth says she was consumed by jealousy back then. Jealous of the older daughter's position, maybe her slightly better status, and definitely her dowry, the one Throckmorton paid for her to leave.
And Patricia was wearing her hand-me-downs, right? That would fuel it.
You can just picture it, can't you? Poorly fitting clothes, constant reminder of her own poverty and the other girl's relative privilege. And Seth says she didn't just stew in it.
What did you do?
She actively stirred the pot. Seth says she was actually glad to see the friction between Throckmorton and his daughter. She engaged in malicious tattling and playing one member of the family against the other. He deliberately fanned the flames.
Wow. So she was actively making a bad situation worse.
Seems so. And consistent with this whole theme of reparation, Seth notes her present personality as the niece is now trying to make up for that, trying to be supportive, cooperative, the opposite of the divisive influence she was before.
Okay, so the parents were working through massive debt. The niece is trying to undo past malice. What about Dick? The boy whose deathbed scene started all this. He died young in that life.
Right, he died at 9. Seth explains that because he died so young, his relationship with Throckmorton wasn't fully worked out. There wasn't enough time for it to mature or resolve whatever its particular challenges were.
So he needed another go.
That's the idea. He chose to be reborn and have the same father again in this life, to continue or complete that interrupted relationship arc. It really underscores the idea that relationships don't just end with death, they often just pause.
Until the entities involved decide it's time to pick up where they left off. What about Dick's wife in the current life? Was she around in 1671 too?
She was. A much sweeter connection, this one. She was apparently the baker's daughter from across the street back then, a childhood playmate of Dick's.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, Seth says they were attracted even then, as kids, and they chose to renew that connection, that affection, in this lifetime. It's a good reminder that not all past life reconnections are about heavy debts. Some are about continuing positive bonds.
It provides a bit of balance to the intense Throckmorton drama.
Definitely. And it all circles back to that fundamental principle Seth keeps emphasizing: free will. Entities choose the circumstances, the when, the where, the who for their rebirth.
The structure is there to allow for facing these challenges, these debts.
But it's never forced. You can, Seth says, choose to ignore the problems, sidestep the challenge. But he calls that a cowardly solution because ultimately it just holds back your own growth, the personality's development. The system encourages resolution, but the choice remains yours.
Okay, we've laid out this incredibly complex web of past lives, resentments, reparations. The sheer weight of it feels enormous. Which brings up the obvious question. How on earth does any individual person manage all this history without just collapsing? Why don't we consciously remember being Throckmorton or his daughter or the jealous maid?
Right. And this is where Seth shifts gears from the historical narrative to the actual mechanics of consciousness, how the system is designed to handle this load. He gives this really helpful
The
analogy.
mind and the brain analogy.
Exactly. He says, think of the entity, the larger whole self, the soul, if you like, as the mind. And the physical self, the personality you experience in this life, that's the brain.
So the entity, the mind, is like this vast cosmic library or hard drive holding everything. All past lives, all experiences, all unresolved stuff.
Precisely. It contains all the data. But, and this is key, it only feeds the physical brain, the current personality, the information that is absolutely necessary or relevant for this specific life's lessons and challenges. The filtering is immense.
It has to be right.
It has to be. And Seth adds another layer here. He talks about the mind also being a portion of the entity that acts like a, well, like a guidance system, almost like the traditional guardian angel concept, but real internal.
Looking out for the personality.
Yeah, looking out for the personality operating here on what he calls the camouflage plane, our physical reality, helping to keep it on track, nudging it away from serious error, using those subtle inner cues.
Which brings us to the inner senses. That's the communication channel.
That's the primary channel between the vast entity mind and the limited physical brain personality. It's not usually words or clear pictures. It's those gut feelings, intuitions, sudden knowings, symbolic dreams, maybe even physical sensations that act as warnings or suggestions.
So why is the main data dump the actual memories of past lives, the core problems kept so deeply buried? Why the intense censorship?
Seth is very direct about this. He says the fundamental issues are shielded from the conscious personality because, if they weren't, so many psychological undercurrents would sweep the ego off its feet and pull the rug of sanity from beneath it.
It would just be too much, overwhelming.
Completely. Imagine trying to navigate your day-to-day life while being consciously aware of every trauma, every joy, every betrayal, every death, every relationship dynamic from hundreds or thousands of lifetimes. The current ego, which is designed and built for this life, simply couldn't handle that flood. It would disintegrate.
So the forgetting, the filtering, it's actually a profound act of kindness, a necessary safety mechanism for us to even function here.
It's presented exactly like that, a cosmic safety feature. And this leads directly into Seth's really unique and frankly quite chilling perspective on what can happen when that safety mechanism fails. Specifically, his take on certain forms of insanity.
Right. He links it to ignoring the inner senses.
Yes. He suggests that some forms of insanity represent a breakdown point. It happens when the personality is facing a major past life problem that's surfacing now, but simultaneously refuses to change course, refuses to heed the warnings coming through the inner senses.
Okay, walk us through that breakdown process. How does it happen, according to Seth?
It starts with ignoring the warnings, pushing past the intuitive red flags, the gut feeling saying stop or change direction. When the personality persistently ignores these signals and pushes past a certain danger point.
The shields come down.
Essentially, yes. The entity seems to decide the current path is so self-destructive that radical intervention is needed. The past data, the raw stuff related to the core problem, rushes up from the subconscious. The psychic filtering fails.
So suddenly the unbearable truth, the raw past life trauma or conflict, is accessible to the conscious mind. What does the ego do then?
It can't just process it calmly, right?
Not according to Seth. The ego, faced with this overwhelming, often contradictory and deeply disturbing data from the past, panics. It realizes it cannot integrate this information without shattering its current identity, so it immediately throws up defenses. Seth calls them countermeasures.
And these countermeasures are the symptoms of psychosis, the delusions, hallucinations, fantasies. That's the idea. The ego isn't trying to understand the truth that's flooding in. It's desperately trying to distort it, to twist it into some kind of narrative, however bizarre, that allows the current personality structure to survive, even if it means losing touch with consensus reality.
So insanity, in this view, is a kind of desperate Last-ditch protective retreat, choosing disorientation over annihilation.
Exactly. It's a complex, tragic defense mechanism. The personality chooses to live in a self-created, often terrifying maze of delusion rather than confront the raw, unbearable truths of its own accumulated history that have broken through the filters.
Let's apply that back to the Throckmorton-daughter dynamic, the parents in the current life. How might that breakdown look for them if their situation got critical?
Seth uses them as a hypothetical example. If their current conflict using the sons as weapons against each other reached an absolutely unbearable pitch, their entities would likely start sending stronger warnings via the inner senses. Maybe intense nightmares, sudden inexplicable anxieties, perhaps even physical symptoms urging them to separate or change radically.
And if they ignored those signals?
If they pushed past that danger point, then the old data, the raw 1671 bitterness, the cruelty, the resentment could flood into their conscious awareness. And their egos, unable to handle that direct blast from the past, might erect those countermeasures, leading to delusions, paranoia, a complete psychological break related to the core themes of betrayal and resentment.
It really raises the stakes on paying attention to those subtle inner feelings, doesn't it? That little nagging feeling you dismiss might actually be your entity trying to keep you sane.
It certainly makes you think twice about ignoring intuition, which actually leads nicely to a lighter moment in the session. Joseph, the host, asks Seth a question about this very thing.
Oh yeah, he asks if they can, directly contact their own entities.
He does, and Seth's response is just perfect. Seth, a mix of gentle teasing and immediate clarification. He says, "You are silly sometimes, Joseph. You should know that you are in contact with your own entities and that the mind is a portion of the entity to begin with."
He's basically saying, you're already swimming in the ocean. Why are you asking how to find water?
Pretty much. He's reminding them the connection isn't something external you dial up, it's inherent. You are a part of your entity, currently focused in the physical. The question isn't how to contact it, but how to become more consciously aware of the communication, the inner senses that are always operating.
So, right in the middle of discussing these huge concepts, cosmic filtering, the nature of sanity, real life just barges in, doesn't it?
It does. The doorbell rings, or rather, there's a knock. It's their friend, John Bradley.
Who was a medical salesman, I think.
That's right. A perfectly timed, mundane interruption to a deeply metaphysical dictation. John comes in, they chat for a bit, he leaves.
And then Seth immediately picks up on him.
Instantly. As soon as John's out the door, Seth comments on him, confirms he was an eager, bungling friend and someone they knew in immediately past lives, and then he launches into this incredibly specific and frankly hilarious past life reading for John.
This is the Cron the Third part, right? The Victorian character.
Cronton III. Seth describes him as a kind of educated medicine man operating back in the 19th century.
And his specialty was, let's just say, unique.
Oh, it was priceless. He peddled potions supposed to arouse erotic passions in weak and fainting Victorian ladies. Love potions, basically.
No way. A Victorian snake oil salesman for romance.
Pretty much. Seth says he ran a small, respectable pharmacy in Boston, but on the side, his real business was selling these concoctions to people trying to secure lovers or get ahead, dealing with, as Seth puts it, idiotic men and women.
The image Seth paints is just brilliant. These prim churchgoers letting the minister in the front door.
While sneaking around to the back room to pick up their little bottles of fleshy incentives from old Cronton, it's pure comedy gold.
So Cronton was quite the character. Ambitious, too.
Very. Seth gives his backstory. He married a woman named Genevieve, described as wealthy, very upright, respectable, and homely. Her family strongly objected to the match. Because Cronton was 4 years younger than her, about 5 times poorer, but, Seth adds, about 10 times more ambitious, you can see the dynamic. He married up, probably for the money and connections. They ended up having 7 children.
7 kids. So the potions didn't harm his own family life, apparently. How did Cronton's story end? Please tell me it was suitably bizarre.
Oh, it delivers. He died in 1863. So he describes him as fat, widowed, and fairly prosperous by then. Died at age 82 or 83. And the cause of death.
Don't keep us in suspense.
He choked to death on a prune pit.
You're kidding? A prune pit? That's anticlimactic. Hilarious. Both.
Right. But Seth immediately adds context. He says it's not quite as silly as it sounds because Cronton was quite portly by then and suffered from gout. To perhaps less agile, prone to eating quickly, it becomes slightly more plausible.
Okay, slightly. Still, what an exit line for old Cronton. And did this past life have any relevance for John Bradley, the friend who just left? A warning, maybe?
A very specific one. Given Cronton's portliness and gout, Seth warns John Bradley, who, remember, had just admitted to Joseph and Jane that he'd had a few drinks on his way over to watch his drinking habits very closely in this life.
Because of a predisposition.
Exactly, a predisposition toward gout, linked back to that portly, prune-pit-choking past self. It's a direct health warning based on a past life tendency.
That's amazing. But Seth also clarified the level of connection here, didn't he?
Yeah.
John wasn't part of the deep Throckmorton drama.
No, and that's an important point. Seth says John was only in the outer circle of their acquaintance back then. The familiarity they felt with him now wasn't necessarily about some heavy, unresolved karmic debt like the Throckmorton situation.
It was just familiarity,
Yeah.
recognition.
Yeah. It shows that you encounter all sorts of connections. Some are profound challenges you've chosen to rework. Others are just familiar faces, acquaintances you bump into again. Seth emphasizes that you meet entirely new people in every life, too. It's not just a closed loop of the same old souls, even if major challenges do tend to get revisited until resolved.
So the prune pit story is more about the continuity of acquaintance and maybe some lingering physical tendencies rather than a major relational debt. Different flavors of past life connection.
Exactly. It adds texture to the whole picture.
Okay, so after the prune pit interlude, we dive back into some pretty heavy-duty metaphysics towards the end of the session. Joseph, the host, brought up a concern they had early on, didn't he?
Yeah, he was worried that maybe in the very beginning of their channeling experiences, they hadn't actually contacted Seth, but another entity named Frank Watts.
And Seth addressed that directly.
He did. He confirmed that, yes, in a way, Frank Watts was involved initially. Seth uses this great image he says he did run after him, grabbing his shirt tail, so to speak.
So Frank Watts acted as a kind of intermediary, a bridge.
That's the sense of it. Seth explains Frank Watts was simply more open to your plane, meaning he was energetically closer or more easily accessible from our physical reality. So he acted as an initial conduit, making it easier for Seth, perhaps a more complex or distant energy, to establish the connection.
Like opening the door for Seth. What happened to Frank Watts?
Seth reassures them Frank is fine, he's simply resting, and he needs it. And Seth adds very clearly that he is not squelching Frank Watts, showing this kind of respect between entities, acknowledging their different states and needs.
That whole exchange highlights the fluidity of consciousness, doesn't it? Personalities, fragments, entities interacting.
It leads right into the final core concept Seth introduces in this session, which is fundamental to his whole cosmology. The idea of personality fragments and the organizing ability.
Okay, break that down. What does he mean by organizing ability?
This is really profound. Seth states that the strength or coherence of any personality, any fragment of consciousness, depends directly on its ability to manage energy specifically, its ability to gather it together in one field as a unit.
So our very existence, our sense of self, is an act of energy organization.
Fundamentally, yes. And he argues that this organizing ability is the most potent force operating on the physical plane. We are constantly, unconsciously using this ability to draw energy together, to structure it, to build up everything from atoms and molecules to cells, neurons, our entire physical bodies, and even the environment we perceive.
And the structure we build, this physical reality, that's what he calls the camouflage pattern.
Exactly, a camouflage pattern. The term itself is so suggestive, isn't it? It implies that physical reality, while seeming solid and absolute to us, is actually a kind of construct, a dense, complex pattern designed perhaps to obscure the underlying, more fluid, energetic reality.
Why camouflage? Why create this dense pattern? Why go to all the effort of organizing energy so intensely?
Seth suggests it's for the experience. The very limitations and solidity of this specific camouflage pattern provide unique challenges, unique opportunities for learning and growth that entities seek. The sheer difficulty of maintaining focus and structure within this dense pattern forces certain kinds of development.
So the density is the point, in a way.
It seems to be the point of this particular type of experience, yes. And if our reality is just one kind of camouflage pattern, built on a specific level of organizing ability, what does that imply about other realities, other planes?
Are they different patterns, requiring different levels of this ability?
Precisely. Seth touches on this. He says some other planes have much simpler camouflage patterns, maybe less dense, less structured. And some planes might be inhabited by personalities or fragments whose organizing ability is weaker. They couldn't sustain the intense focus required for our kind of physical reality.
You can't hold the energy together tightly enough.
That's the idea. And conversely, there are other planes inhabited by personalities whose organizing ability is incredibly strong, highly developed.
So strong they don't need this dense physical structure anymore.
Exactly. They've mastered the lessons of this kind of density, perhaps. They no longer need to use their organizing ability to build such a complex, restrictive camouflage pattern, like physical matter, to maintain their identity and continue their experience. They might exist in more fluid, purely energetic states.
It reframes the whole universe as this spectrum of consciousness, organizing energy into different patterns, different realities, based on ability and focus.
It does. It's a vast, dynamic picture. And it connects everything back. The Throckmorton family drama, the relational debts, the psychological filters. It's all happening within this specific, challenging camouflage pattern, constructed and maintained by the personalities involved, using their inherent organizing ability.
It's mind-blowing stuff.
Oh.
You go from worrying about a cat knocking over a drawing to contemplating the energetic structure of all reality.
They covered a lot of ground in one session. From 17th century straw mattresses and jealous maids to the fundamental physics of consciousness.
Seth definitely recognized they had had enough by the end, right?
Oh, yeah. His sign-off was just perfect, acknowledging their mental fatigue with that typical dry wit. Sleepy time is no crime. Now I am no poet, and you know it.
A perfect ending. Hashtag tag outro, summary, encouragement, and final thought.
So what a journey that was. From a crowded room in 1671 to the very fabric of reality.
Yeah, an incredible deep dive. We really unpacked some huge ideas today.
We definitely hit on some key takeaways for you. Firstly, this idea of present life relationships, especially challenging ones, potentially being conscious, chosen attempts at resolving past conflicts or imbalances, challenges, not punishments.
Right, and the crucial role of the entity, the greater mind, in filtering our past experiences to protect the current ego. That whole safety mechanism idea.
And the flip side of that, the startling concept that severe psychological breakdown might sometimes be the ego's desperate defense against truths flooding in when that filtering system fails, especially if inner warnings are ignored.
Plus, the absolutely fundamental idea that physical reality itself is this complex camouflage pattern, actively maintained by our own consciousness through an inherent organizing ability.
These are foundational concepts in the Seth material, and they really do offer a different lens through which to view, well, everything.
Absolutely. And all this incredible insight comes directly from the source we discussed. Session 21 of the early sessions, Book 1 of Seth material. We absolutely have to credit the Seth material itself and the publisher, New Awareness Network.
We really can't recommend diving into the Seth books themselves highly enough if this resonates with you. You can find them and tons of other resources by visiting the New Awareness Network website and bookstore. The address is https://sethcenter.com/early sessions.
Definitely check that out. Okay, so for our final thought today, something for you to really chew on. If Seth is right, if even something as extreme as what we call insanity can be, at its root, a kind of desperate protective shield against overwhelming self-knowledge erupting from the past, then what about the smaller things? What relatively minor illusions, biases, or perhaps even comforting delusions might your own entity be subtly maintaining right now just to keep your current ego stable and functional within this camouflage? Yeah. Think about it. Those weird, irrational fears you have, that instant, inexplicable dislike of someone you just met, those strangely persistent anxieties that don't seem logical. Could they be more than just quirks? Could they actually be heavily veiled, highly filtered echoes? Fate memories from your deeper self, subtly shaping your reality to keep things manageable? Maybe the real challenge isn't always about seeking brand new information, but about gently, carefully, peeling back the protective layers your own greater consciousness might have already put in place.
Something to definitely ponder. Until next time, keep digging deeper.